Sabhuta Sukshmendriya Sannikarsham Manomayam Devamayam Vikaryam Samsadya Gatya Sahatena Yati Vijnana Tattvam Guna Sannirodham. Sabhuta Sukshmendriya Sannikarsham Manomayam Devamayam Vikaryam Samsadya Gatya Sahatena Yati Vijnana Tattvam Guna Sannirodham. Matajis. Sabhuta Sukshmendriya Sannikarsham Manomayam Devamayam Vikaryam Samsadya Gatya Sahatena Yati Vijnana Tattvam Guna Sannirodham. Sabhuta Sukshmendriya Sannikarsham Manomayam Devamayam Vikaryam Samsadya Gatya Sahatena Yati Vijnana Tattvam Guna Sannirodham. So we read the word translation yesterday, so I'm going to go straight to the translation. Translation purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The devotee, thus surpassing the gross and subtle forms of coverings, enters the plane of egoism, and in that status he merges the material modes of nature, ignorance and passion, into this point of neutralization, and thus reaches egoism in goodness. After this, all egoism is merged into the Mahat Tattva, and he comes to the point of pure self-realization. Purport. Pure self-realization, as we have several times discussed, is the pure consciousness of admitting oneself to be the eternal servitor of the Lord. Thus, one is reinstated in his original position of transcendental loving service to the Lord, as will be clearly explained in the following verse. This stage of rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord without any hopes of emolument from the Lord or any other way can be attained when the material senses are purified and the original pure state of the senses is revived. It is suggested herein that the process of purifying the senses is by the yogic way. Namely, the gross senses are merged into the mode of ignorance and the subtle senses are merged into the mode of passion. The mind belongs to the mode of goodness and therefore is called Devamaya or godly. Perfect purification of the mind is possible when one is fixed in the conviction of being the eternal servitor of the Lord. Therefore, simple attainment of goodness is also a material mode. One has to surpass this stage of material goodness and reach the point of purified goodness or Vasudeva Sattva. This Vasudeva Sattva helps one enter into the kingdom of God. We may also remember in this connection that the process of gradual emancipation by the devotees in the manner mentioned above, although authoritative, is not viable in the present age because of the people's being primarily unaware of yoga practice. The so-called yoga practice by the professional protagonists may be physiologically beneficial, but such small success cannot help one in the attainment of spiritual emancipation as mentioned herein. 5,000 years ago, when the social status of human society was in perfect Vedic order, the yoga process mentioned herein was a common affair for everyone because everyone, especially the Brahmana and Kshatriya, was trained in the transcendental art under the care of the spiritual master far away from home, in the status of brahmacharya. Modern man, however, is incompetent to understand it perfectly. Lord Sri Chaitanya therefore made it easier for the prospective devotee of the present age in the following specific manner. Ultimately, there is no difference in the result. The first and foremost point is that one must understand the prime importance of Bhakti Yoga. The living beings in different species of life are undergoing different terms of engagement according to their fruitive actions and reactions. But in the execution of different activities, one who secures some resources in Bhakti Yoga can understand the importance of service to the Lord through the causeless mercy of the Lord, as well as that of the spiritual master. A sincere soul is helped by the Lord through meeting a bona fide spiritual master. One gets the seed of Bhakti Yoga. Bona fide spiritual master, the representative of the Lord. By the instruction of such a spiritual master, one gets the seed of Bhakti Yoga. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that the devotee sow the seed of Bhakti Yoga in his heart and nurture it by the watering of hearing and chanting the holy name, fame, etc. of the Lord. The simple process of offenselessly chanting and hearing the holy name of the Lord will promote one very soon to the stage of emancipation. There are 3 stages in chanting the holy name of the Lord. The first stage is the offensive stage of the holy name. The second is the reflective stage of chanting the holy name. The third stage is the offenseless chanting of the holy name of the Lord. In the second stage only, the stage of reflection between the offensive and offenseless stages, one automatically attains the stage of emancipation. And in the offenseless stage, one actually enters into the kingdom of God. Although physically he may be apparently within the material world. To attain the offenseless stage, one must be on guard in the following manner. When we speak of hearing and chanting, it means not only should one chant and hear the holy name of the Lord as Rama, Krishna, or systematically the 16 names Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. But one should also hear and read the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of devotees. This primary practice of Bhakti Yoga will cause the seed already sowed within the heart to sprout. And by a regular watering process, as mentioned above, the Bhakti Yoga creeper will begin to grow. By systematic nurturing, the creeper will grow to such an extent that it will penetrate the coverings of the universe, as we have heard in the previous verses, reach the effulgent sky, the Brahmajyoti, and go farther and farther and reach the spiritual sky, where there are innumerable spiritual planets called Vaikuntha Lokas. Above all of them is Krishna Loka or Goloka Vrindavan, wherein the growing creeper enters and takes repose at the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, the original personality of Godhead. When one reaches the lotus feet of Krishna at Goloka Vrindavan, the watering process of hearing and chanting, as also chanting of the holy name in the pure devotional stage, fructifies, and the fruits grown there in the form of love of God are tangibly tasted by the devotee, even though he is here in this material world. The ripe fruits of love of God are relished only by the devotees constantly engaged in the watering process as described above. But the working devotee must always be mindful so that the creeper which has grown will not be cut off. Therefore, he should be mindful of the following considerations. Offense by one at the feet of a pure devotee may be likened to the mad elephant who devastates a very good garden if it enters. 2. One must be very careful to guard himself against such offenses at the feet of pure devotees, just as one protects a creeper by all-round fencing. 3. It so happens that by the watering process, some weeds are also grown, and unless such weeds are uprooted, the nurturing of the main creeper or the creeper of Bhakti Yoga may be hampered. 4. Actually, these weeds are material enjoyment, merging of the self in the absolute without separate individuality, and many other desires in the field of religion, economic development, sense enjoyment, and emancipation. There are many other weeds like disobedience to the tenets of the revered scriptures, unnecessary engagements, killing animals, and hankering after material gain, prestige, and adoration. If sufficient care is not taken, then the watering process may only help to breed the weeds, stunting the healthy growth of the main creeper, resulting in no fructification of the ultimate requirement, love of God. The devotee must therefore be careful to uproot the different weeds in the very beginning. Only then will the healthy growth of the main creeper not be stunted. And by so doing, the devotee is able to relish the fruit of love of God and thus live practically with Lord Krishna even in this life and be able to see the Lord in every step. The highest perfection of life is to enjoy life constantly in the association of the Lord. And one who can relish this does not aspire after any temporary enjoyment of the material world via other media. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shriyutaf Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagarjatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Prabhu Mande Balopi Yettad Anugrahat Tarenana Matagrahat Vyaptam Siddhanta Sagaram. Okay, so Sabhuta Sukshmendriya Sannikarsham Manomayam Devamayam Vikaryam Samsadya Gatya Sahate Nayati Vijnana Tattvam Guna Sannirodham.
You said it's live on YouTube. Facebook later. You want me to tell them to try to do it now?
No, I don't know, but anyways, all right. So over here, one of the final stages of a Ashtanga yogi who achieves perfection is being described. That this Ashtanga yogi surpasses the gross and subtle forms of the coverings of the material universe, which is the 5 gross elements and the 3 subtle elements. So earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then mind, intelligence, and ego. So when he comes to that platform of ego, when he comes to the covering of this material universe called ego, at that point of time, the material modes of nature of ignorance and passion are completely neutralized. So, and he reaches egoism in goodness. After that, he enters into the covering known as the Mahatattva, which the Mahatattva is basically the conglomerate of all material elements in a dormant state. It's just like a dormant mix of all the material elements without any of their individual characteristics. It's just matter in its absolute basic form as the energy, as the third energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's the first energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is his internal energy, which is the pleasure-giving potency, which, of one of the aspects of that is the pleasure-giving potency, and that internal energy is called as Yogamaya. She arranges for all the different pastimes of the Supreme Lord, and she facilitates, basically, the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. She also gives pleasure to him in the form of Srimati Radharani, who is the personification of that pleasure potency and the master of the internal energy. So then you have the second energy, which is the borderline energy or the Tathastha Shakti, which is us, we living entities, spiritual sparks, which are at the border of the internal and the external energy. And then you have the third energy, which is Mahamaya, matter, Mahatattva. So Mahatattva is the energy itself, and the controller of that energy, the personification of that energy is Durga Devi Mahamaya herself, who is a distant expansion of Yogamaya. So, so the yogi is is getting liberated from all these material coverings, and after he crosses the Mahatattva, he no longer is in touch with material nature. And now he has reached the point of pure self-realization in the sense that he has completely achieved the platform of the self, which is free from all material contamination. And at that point of time, the Ashtanga yogi, if he does the process right and he approaches the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he then takes up, he learns about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he sees the spiritual world, he aspires and desires to enter into the spiritual world and learns about the service of the Supreme Lord, and in that way he becomes situated in the spiritual world and never falls down. That's basically what the next verse refers to. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is the text of yoga. It is called Yoga Shastra. That's what we chant at the end in the morning. We chant Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su. So this Bhagavad Gita, what is it? Bhagavad Gita Su, Upanishadsu. It is an Upanishad. The Bhagavad Gita is an Upanishad. It is called Gita Upanishad. It is the best of all Upanishads because it is recited by the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, although it is found in the Mahabharata. Upanishadsu. And what does it teach? Brahma Vidya. It gives us knowledge of the Supreme. It gives us knowledge of Brahman. It gives us knowledge of Krishna. Brahma Vidyayam. And what is it? Yoga Shastra. It is a text of yoga. It is the scripture of yoga. There is no other text. Actually, even Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, they speak of only one process of yoga, which is primarily the Ashtanga Yoga process. But Yoga Shastra is the Bhagavad Gita because it speaks of all the different types of yoga processes. So what does Krishna speak in Bhagavad Gita? First, in chapter 2, what is the first instruction he gives Arjuna? You're not your body, you're spirit soul. This is the first basic, fundamental spiritual instruction. Once you understand you're not this body, you're spirit soul, then automatically the question comes as to what next. So once you understand your spirit soul, what comes next after that? You know you're not this body, you're spirit soul. What comes next? What is your duty? What am I supposed to do? Okay, I'm not my body, I'm spirit soul. So what do I do? Who am I? That's the first thing. So you understand you're not this body, you're spirit soul. But what is my duty now? If I'm not matter, if I'm not this body, then what happens is everything that's connected to this body is put into question. And the very purpose of life is put into question. And when that purpose of life is put into question, immediately what is brought into the picture? What is my duty? Okay, so what is my duty? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to go about that? Krishna is telling Arjuna to fight because he's saying, so what Krishna starts off with as soon as, pretty much after he explains we're not this body, we're spirit soul, is he starts off explaining karma yoga. Actually before that he explains buddhi yoga, right? He explains Sankhya, Buddhi. What is Sankhya? Sankhya, see, once you understand you're not this body, you're spirit soul, Krishna starts to delineate. He first explains Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga basically means that you understand you're not this body, you're spirit soul. So now you come to understand that you are engaged in this body because of karma. And that, pious activities generate pious results. Impious activities generate impious results. And Krishna tells Arjuna that even on the platform of mundane piety, you should be fighting this war. Because if you don't execute things in the right way, if you don't understand how the laws of this universe work, then you may actually do things that that bring happiness neither to you, neither to anybody else. So he's saying that even if you see, even the people who are dying in this battle, they attain a good destination. And if you were to win this battle, then you enjoy this kingdom. If you don't, if you die in this battle, you go to the heavenly planets and you enjoy there. Right? That's what Krishna is speaking in Bhagavad Gita. And in this way, he delineates, he gives a brief understanding of how, of certain laws of nature in this world, that there are certain ways in which this universe operates. And Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that either way, it's better to execute your duty and not run away from it. Because executing your duty will bring about auspiciousness. Then after that, Krishna explains Sankhya Yoga. What is Sankhya Yoga? In Sankhya Yoga, Krishna is basically delineating what is matter, what is spirit, and how matter, how the spirit soul has to become detached and become above. Basically, he's above spirit. Sorry, he's above matter. The spirit soul is above matter, and therefore is unaffected by the changes of matter. This is what Krishna explains. Arjuna asks about the Sthita Dhir Muni, right, in chapter 2, towards the end. He asks about Sthita Dhir Muni, and Krishna is explaining Sthita Dhir Muni. So, Krishna gives the idea that although you may be engaged in different activities in this world, actually you are meant to be aloof from it. Why are you meant to be aloof from it? Because you're spirit soul, you're not this body. And ultimately everything is supposed to be executed in what one important factor Krishna brings in chapter 2. He brings in the understanding of the Supreme. Actually, therefore, chapter 2 is said to be, Prabhupada titles it, the summary of the Bhagavad Gita. He says that the contents of the Gita summarized. Because actually in chapter 2, Krishna has explained the entire science of devotional service. Krishna explains that it's better to act according to the duties of according to your duty. That way it produces pious results. But actually, because you're a spirit soul, you're not meant to be affected by this, because you understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you understand that there is somebody called as the Supreme Controller, and that is Ishvara. And Krishna explains that he is that Ishvara. He gives a hint of that in chapter 2. And he explains that by selfless service to the Supreme, one transcends all types of material difficulties. And that Arjuna should execute his duties as a service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is in essence Bhakti Yoga. And that by doing so, he realizes the Supreme, he achieves bliss and peace. And in the end of his life, he will become liberated and go back home, back to Godhead. Krishna explains this in chapter 2. However, Arjuna isn't willing to accept it. Arjuna is not satisfied. So, what does Krishna do? In chapter 3, what does he explain? What is chapter 3? Karma Yoga. See, now what Krishna says, what Krishna does is he starts to systematically explain the process of yoga. Why? Because by systematically explaining the process of yoga, Krishna satisfies Arjuna's doubts. Because Arjuna is not ready to just take the instruction of Krishna. Like, okay, just do your duty as a service to me, fight, because this fighting on the material platform, it will give you all the material opulences that you need, everything that you need for sufficient life. Because you are executing it according to the laws of material nature. And on the spiritual sense, by executing this duty as a service to me, and by constantly, and your mind being constantly absorbed in me, you will ultimately come to me because you are executing devotional service to me. If Arjuna was willing to just take it as it is, everything would have been fine. But Arjuna wasn't. So now Krishna is going and delineating the process of yoga. Why does he explain Karma Yoga? Because in Karma Yoga, that is the first stage, that as soon as one understands that you're not this body, you're spirit soul, you understand that there is a Supreme Person. You understand that there is God. Now, once there is God, you have to execute, but you still have material attachments. So now, execute your material duties, execute your life in a manner by offering it all to Krishna. This is karma yoga. But you're still attached to your duties. So where does Krishna go after that? He explains Jnana Yoga. He explains Jnana Yoga because in Jnana Yoga, I was explaining this in a previous class, but I'm going through it again because it's relevant to the purport that we read. That in Jnana Yoga, Krishna is delineating what is what. What is spirit? What is matter? What is the nature of this material universe? What is the nature of knowledge in itself? And how knowledge is liberating. That a person starts to think, he starts to feel, it's not just about, okay, what do I just like, okay, I'm executing my life, I need to be a devotee of Krishna, but I have all these material desires. So what I'll do is, let me worship Krishna, but I also have some material desires, let me execute that, and gradually I will purify. But the gradual purification happens by hearing. It happens by hearing. By getting knowledge, one starts to detach oneself from material attachments. And that leads to the next chapter called Karma Sannyasa Yoga. That although Krishna is explaining Karma Yoga, then he is explaining Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness, which is Karma Sannyasa Yoga, which basically means executing one's actions without attachment to them. You execute. Why do you need to execute your duties? Why do you need to execute your duties? Because we have this body, you have to do something, you have to do some activity. And therefore, I will do the activity that is according to the nature of my body. I'm not going to, for instance, a devotee, when he starts practicing Krishna consciousness, initially, he may, when you first start coming to the temple, you may like to do certain services and you start doing that. And devotees engage you in doing some services like that as you visit. And okay, oh, you like to wash pots. Okay, you go, please wash pots. You like to do this, you do that. You know, and so little engagement is there. But soon afterwards, a person starts to understand that I'm doing these duties not because I like to do that. And why? What is the problem in that? Then when you're given some other service, you don't like doing it. You know, I don't like that service. That's not for me. That's not meant for me. But why? Because you're still kind of attached to this concept that you're meant to do that you've got that you like a certain thing, that the mind is attached to something, and that's the only thing you want to do. It doesn't matter whether another service is needed for Krishna. The devotee in that neophyte stage is still too absorbed in himself, and therefore cannot think so much. But as he makes more advancement, he starts to understand what Krishna likes, what is the need. And then he starts to take up those kind of... Basically, even though he may still perform the services that he's very good at, he doesn't despise the other services. And when there is a need to perform the other services, he strives his best to do so. Especially if that's the order of the spiritual master. Because he understands that ultimately all ability comes from Krishna. I have a particular ability, I'm going to engage it in Krishna's service because we must act. If I don't act, what happens? I fall in illusion. I just become lazy. I become influenced by the mode of ignorance. Therefore, I must act. We must act. But instead of acting out of the bodily concept of life, the devotee is now acting on the platform of duty. He's acting on the platform of knowledge. That, yes, I've got this body. I have certain abilities. Now I'm going to utilize those abilities to Krishna, and I recognize the source of those abilities to be Krishna. I'm going to execute those duties to the best of my ability, but I'm not attached to the result of the so-called sense of pleasure that one gets that I am doing this duty, that I have executed this. The devotee wants the results for Krishna, but the way a materialist desires the result is that he considers himself to be the cause of those results. He doesn't think Krishna is the cause of the results. He thinks ahamkara, that I am the cause of those results. That Krishna may be a cause, but I'm also a cause. You know? So karma sannyasa yoga is where he doesn't think that he's the cause of it. And the fruits, he desires it because he wants to offer it to Krishna. But if the fruits don't come after diligently performing one's duty, he accepts it as Krishna's will. And if it's the order of the spiritual master, he still keeps trying because he realizes that Krishna wants me to go through some purification until the results come. Because, so he executes his duty. And the devotee also recognizes that by performing activities in this way, my material needs are automatically taken care. In Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the devotee is not overly concerned about his material needs. When I mean overly concerned, that means he's concerned only to the extent that is required to perform his duty. He is not in anxiety about his material needs because he understands that by performing Krishna consciousness, his material needs and spiritual needs are taken care of. This is Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Now, Krishna explains Dhyana Yoga. Now, of course, I'm explaining Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Sannyasa Yoga and Dhyana Yoga the way Srila Prabhupada has approached this, meaning that they are all aspects of Krishna consciousness. And this is how Bhakti Yoga actually contains all of the practices of the different forms of yoga, and is the most supreme because actually all the other forms of yoga are derived from Bhakti Yoga, and they are meant to lead to Bhakti Yoga because the person who is unable to accept Bhakti Yoga in its purest form is recommended in Shastra to go to these other places. But there is no need ultimately. So Dhyana Yoga is meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in our case it is meditation upon the name, form, pastimes, abode, and character of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We meditate upon this. And what does that meditation mean? That meditation means withdrawal from thinking about material activities. That up till that point of time, we are trying to detach ourselves from material activities, but we do not have much taste or attachment towards hearing the name, form, quality, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As a devotee makes more advancement, not only is he performing his service, he starts to feel the need. I have to make my chanting better. I have to make my hearing better. I have to make my reading better. Not just it's not like, okay, I have to read for 1 hour. No, but he's actually trying to absorb himself in that. And when you absorb yourself in the holy name, when you absorb yourself in chanting, at that point of time, one is completely absorbed in Krishna. Now, he may still execute his worldly duties as a service, a devotional service to Krishna. But there is times and periods where he's pulling himself away from that worldly service, because now is the time for me to chant, now is the time for me to read. I'm going to serve Krishna in this way. And a devotee becomes fully absorbed in that meditation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What happens is, then that meditation trickles into his services also. That even while he is performing his services, he is starting to meditate upon the name of Krishna. He is starting to meditate upon the form of Krishna. He is starting to meditate upon the characters of Krishna. He is starting to meditate upon the pastimes of Krishna. As he is performing his services, he is reminded of certain names of Krishna. He's reminded of certain forms of Krishna. He's reminded of certain pastimes of Krishna. In this way, the meditation starts to become an active meditation. It's not a passive meditation, because the taste has become that I am performing this for Krishna. That and what happens is, say a devotee is performing his activities, he starts to remember of certain verses of Krishna, which reminds him of certain qualities of Krishna, because he's starting to get absorbed in this way. Initially, that absorption will not come until one is dedicating certain time. But after some dedication of time, apart from that time where one is reading and hearing and chanting, even in the course of one's activities, one starts to remember what one has learned and what one has heard, what one has meditated upon during one's hearing, chanting and reading, etc. So in this way, the process of Dhyana Yoga comes. Okay, what does that lead to? It leads to complete knowledge of the absolute truth. And anyways, I don't want to go over all the 18 chapters itself, but I mean, it would be nice to, because they're related to this verse, and people think there's this misconception that Bhagavad Gita, it's not very systematic. We have to systematically present, but Bhagavad Gita is extremely systematic. Krishna is explaining everything very systematically. It is the progress of yoga and finally culminating in ultimate surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Total and unconditional surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the point is that here, as one is meditating upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one has to get rid of the weeds. This is the second part of this purport. How has Lord Chaitanya made this process easy? See, what Krishna is explaining that would have taken several lifetimes literally for a person to go through has been made easy by Lord Chaitanya, because actually Bhakti Yoga contains all the elements of all the other yoga processes. And therefore Bhakti Yoga is recommended in Kali Yuga, because we don't have the time, we don't have the ability. But the way Lord Chaitanya has made it easy is by emphasizing the holy name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because ultimately the holy name is the most accessible form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And by constant and proper meditation upon the holy name, everything else is achieved. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur would say, Iha hoite sarva siddhi hoi be sabar. Or Ihaite sarva siddhi hoi be sabar, something like this. So, because in the other processes of karma yoga, executing one's duty, etc., one has to understand what is the varnashrama duties. You have to understand what varna is. You have to understand what duties are acceptable to Krishna, what duties are unacceptable to Krishna. Like for instance, there is the different. For instance, if you are a Kshatriya, then you have to understand that one of your duties is to protect. That you cannot be an administrator without protecting your citizens. But nowadays, who cares about all that? What kind of administrator protects? They are the biggest cheaters. The politicians are the biggest cheaters. So nobody has any sense of any duty. The teacher is supposed to selflessly teach the students, but the teacher teaches for the salary. If you don't give the salary, the teacher is going to quit. He or she doesn't care about the students. They care about their salary. So in this way, all the duties in this material world are completely convoluted and they're confused. And apart from that, people are engaged in grossly sinful activities which they don't even know is wrong. They don't even know that it is not the platform of a human being to just hop from one girl to another girl several times a week and just have sex like cats and dogs. They don't even know this. So where is the question of them understanding what duty is? Where is the question of them coming to the mode of goodness to understand transcendental knowledge and then meditation and all this kind of things? It's extremely degraded. So Lord Chaitanya, he came to give us the holy name because this holy name is so powerful that if somehow or the other one becomes attracted to Krishna, directly in contact with Krishna, because the only hope for the conditioned souls of this age is to come directly in contact with Krishna. If you don't come in directly in contact with Krishna and you are trying all these indirect processes of, we'll try some little yoga, we'll try some little sound bath, and we'll try some this and we'll try some that, and we'll invent ways in which we'll hide Krishna, you will never get purified. It's hopeless. It's impossible. We have to bring people directly in touch with Krishna. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada's primary methods of preaching were always Harinam, book distribution, and Prasadam distribution. Primarily, that whatever his programs were, they were meant to bring people to these three things. And you infuse them with this as much as possible. Take prasadam as much as you can. Why? Because you're coming in contact with Krishna. Take prasadam, take prasadam. Take these books, distribute these books as much as you can. There is, oh Prabhuji, you're distributing too many books, you're giving a person too many books. No, there is no too many books. These books are Krishna himself. Take these books, distribute these books profusely. Chant the holy name of the Lord. Kirtan. We do bona fide kirtan for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Harinam must be done in every city, every town, every village, every street. It doesn't matter what time, place. Just try to do it as much as possible. Of course, you have to see. In some countries you can't do it, then you have to figure. But the point is, we're trying to bring people directly in touch with Krishna. By bringing them directly in touch with Krishna, the purification starts to happen. Because otherwise there is no hope. And you will see all the elements of all the different yoga processes start to work on our lives. They start to get in. Until we get knowledge, we don't really understand it. But the process works whether we understand it or not. And the different processes of yoga starts to work. But the hearing and chanting is extremely important, because while one may become attached to Krishna, one will not develop detachment from this material world and attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead unless one starts to hear and chant. And specifically, Srila Prabhupada is saying it's not just the holy name, but also the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, we are speaking. Therefore, we are giving classes. Therefore, we spend time trying to read and understand the subject matter, so that we can come out of this bodily concept of life. Otherwise we will just get absorbed in all the miseries that we keep going through, the difficulties that happen in our life and this and that. So, wow, I'm just running out of time. Okay, so by systematic nurturing, the creeper will grow. And so the process of the creeper is finally, it takes shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna in the spiritual world. This creeper, we're watering by hearing and chanting. We're watering the creeper of devotional service. We're developing more and more attachment to Krishna and losing taste more and more for material activities. Now, in the process, one has to very clearly understand, and this is why Krishna is explaining, after explaining attaining the Supreme in chapter 7, right? In chapter 7, chapter 8 is attaining the Supreme. Krishna is explaining attaining the Supreme. But then he starts explaining the aspects of the Supreme, devotional service, and then you can see later in chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, he's basically delineating where you can fall down. What are the different demoniac qualities? What are the three modes of material nature? How does the material nature work? So all these things need to be understood. Why? Because otherwise the weeds grow. You think you're cultivating devotional service, but actually what you're cultivating is material desire. You don't realize, because you cannot distinguish between what is material desire and what is spiritual desire. You don't understand the difference. So therefore, these 8 aspects are mentioned, that one must be very careful to guard oneself against the offenses. It so happens that by the watering process some weeds are grown, and unless the weeds are uprooted, the nurturing of the main creeper or the creeper of Bhakti Yoga may be hampered. And what are these weeds? Material enjoyment, merging the self with the absolute without separate individuality, and many other desires in the field of religion, economic development, sense enjoyment, and emancipation. Others are disobedience to the scriptures, unnecessary engagements, just wasting time. Unnecessary engagements, killing animals, hankering after material gain, prestige, adoration. It's just fighting or doing some just silly, frivolous activities. All these destroy our creeper of devotional service. And we have to deal it. That's why we need the association of devotees, because the association of devotees point out, Prabhuji, come on, get real. Why are you in so much Maya? Why are you in so much Maya? Because it helps, and the spiritual master points things out. Anyways, more can be said, but it always takes time. You build it up and then there's time's out, because we're in the marathon. And we have to stop the class. It's 8:30. But little more can be said about this purport. Anyways, if we read these books, everything is found in these books. Whatever we're supposed to state, whatever we will state, whatever we should have stated, everything is found in Srila Prabhupada's purports. Just by reading them, one can achieve all perfection. The entire science of Krishna consciousness is here. The law book to go back home, back to Godhead is here. So please absorb yourself in these books and distribute them as much as possible. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Vancha kalpatrubhyascha kripa